This is the story of four people who ruled China's nightmares, not from the shadows, but with Mao's blessing. Historians Roderick MacFarquhar and Michael Schoenhals describe them as the ideological shock troops of Mao's Cultural Revolution, a small group with enormous power and no limits, a poet turned fanatic, a propagandist intoxicated with violence, a party chief who weaponized ideology, and Mao's wife, the woman who believed terror was loyalty. Tonight, in Dictators Files, we open the case of the Gang of Four, the enforcers who carried out Mao's cruelty, and the fall that came when the dictator they served finally died. She was born in 1914 in Shandong, a child of poverty, instability, and humiliation. Her father left early. Her mother worked as a maid. Nothing in Jiang Qing's early life suggested she would one day help rule a nation of 1 billion people. But she carried one trait that historians repeatedly note: a hunger for recognition, a need to be seen, respected, feared. According to biographer Roxane Whitkey, Jiang grew up resentful, ambitious, and acutely aware of social slights. She learned early that survival came not from strength, but from performance. In the 1930s, she reinvented herself in Shanghai. On stage, she used a different name, different accent, different persona, a chameleon with sharp eyes and no hesitation. Directors called her talented. Others called her ruthless. Everyone agreed she wanted more than the theater could give. In 1937, she traveled to Yan'an, the communist base. A world of caves, hunger, discipline, and politics. Here, Jiang met Mao Zedong. He was already powerful, already feared, already prone to paranoia. Their relationship was forbidden, scandalous, and politically explosive. But Mao wanted her, and what Mao wanted, the party obeyed. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar writes that senior leaders viewed Jiang with deep distrust, fearing she would influence Mao. To contain her, the party imposed strict rules: no political appointments, no public authority, no interference in state affairs. For years, Jiang Qing simmered in resentment. She lived inside the revolution, but was denied its power. MacFarquhar describes her as watching, waiting, storing every humiliation. Then came 1966, the Cultural Revolution, and Jiang Qing saw her opening. Chaos was a ladder, and she intended to climb. The moment Mao unleashed the Red Guards into the streets, the moment teachers were dragged out, books burned, temples destroyed, Jiang stepped forward and reinvented herself again. Not as an actress, not as a wife, but as Mao's ideological enforcer. Schoenhals notes that she quickly became both the face and the voice of the Cultural Revolution's cultural destruction. She attacked writers, artists, directors, anyone who represented the old culture she had never been allowed to dominate. Her speeches were sharp, her targets carefully chosen, her authority undeniable. The woman once barred from politics was now leading purges that reshaped China's cultural and intellectual life. All under Mao's protection, all under Mao's smile. And as the Cultural Revolution descended deeper into violence, Jiang Qing was no longer just a participant. She was becoming the architect of terror. One of four. The Gang of Four didn't exist yet, not formally, not publicly. But Jiang Qing's rise lit the fuse. The Cultural Revolution was not a movement, it was a storm. And inside that storm, Jiang Qing began assembling the people who would soon be feared across China. Not soldiers, not generals, but true believers, ideological zealots willing to turn Mao's vague commands into organized terror. Historians MacFarquhar and Schoenhals described the emerging alliance as a coalition of radicals who understood that chaos was their pathway to power. Zhang Chunqiao, a party theorist from Shanghai, cold, precise. He believed that the revolution had lost its purity and that enemies were everywhere. As deputy mayor of Shanghai, Jiang mastered political combat. He knew how to purge rivals with a smile, how to weaponize ideology with the efficiency of a bureaucrat. When the Cultural Revolution erupted, he sided immediately with Jiang Qing, not out of loyalty, but calculation. He understood that Jiang had Mao's ear, and standing next to her meant standing closer to the throne. Yao Wenyuan, a literary critic whose pen often cut deeper than any blade. In November 1965, Yao published the article that lit the fuse for the Cultural Revolution, an attack on the play Hai Rui dismissed from office. Historians universally agree, without Yao's article, the Cultural Revolution might not have begun when it did. But Yao did not write it alone. He wrote it at Jiang Qing's request, and she used it to strike at rivals she had resented for decades. After the article appeared, Yao became essential. He provided the ideological justification for purging artists, teachers, intellectuals, anyone Jiang wanted to destroy. Wang Hongwen, the youngest of the four, a factory security worker from Shanghai, a man with no elite ties, no historic pedigree, but a talent for organizing radical youth. During the violent struggles of 1966 to 67, Wang led worker groups that seized entire districts of Shanghai. He proved he could turn crowds into weapons. MacFarquhar notes that Wang rose faster than anyone in the Cultural Revolution except Mao's own wife, and Jiang Qing noticed. She gathered these three around her: Zhang, the strategist; Yao, the propagandist; Wang, the street enforcer. Together, they formed a nucleus of radical power inside the collapsing party structure. A group united not by friendship, but by ambition, resentment, and Mao's approval. Historians describe the atmosphere inside Mao's court as a landscape of shifting alliances. But Jiang's circle remained constant. They needed her. She needed them. And Mao needed them all to execute his most destructive campaign. By 1967, the violence across China had escalated beyond anything the party could control. Student factions fought with chains, axes, rifles. Red Guards tortured teachers in schoolyards. Families were forced to denounce each other under threat of death. And behind this chaos, Jiang Qing's radical alliance grew stronger. This was the moment they stopped being individuals, stopped being functionaries, stopped being rivals. This was the moment they began to coalesce into something more dangerous. A political weapon with 4 hands and one purpose: to reshape China through terror. The Gang of Four was nearly complete. By 1967, the Cultural Revolution had stopped being a movement. It had become a hunt, and Mao needed hunters. Jiang Qing, Zhang Chunqiao, Yao Wenyuan, Wang Hongwen, not yet called the Gang of Four, but already behaving like one. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar writes that this period marked a transfer of terror from the center to the streets, and the people driving it were Mao's radicals. They didn't just enforce ideology, they enforced fear. The first blood. The violence had names. Lao She, China's great novelist, author of Tea House, dragged to a Beijing lake by Red Guards, beaten, humiliated. He walked into the water afterward and never came out. Bian Zhongyun, deputy principal of a girls' school, accused of being bourgeois. beaten with nail-studded clubs by her own students until she collapsed on the pavement, left to die. These killings were not isolated. They were the signal. Mao unleashed chaos. The radicals gave it direction. Jiang didn't need to raise a weapon. Her voice was enough. She stood on stages, in studios, in meeting halls, denouncing artists, writers, directors, people she had envied for years. MacFarquhar notes that Jiang carried a personal blacklist in her mind. Every name on it soon faced denunciation, exile, or death. Her target wasn't culture. It was her rivals. Zhang operated in silence, a strategist who turned Mao's slogans into political executions. The 1967 January storm in Shanghai, the seizure of the city government, was his masterpiece. Factories fell, offices occupied, leaders dragged out. Zhang didn't lead mobs, he directed them. Yao's articles were weapons. One sentence from him could destroy a career, a family, a life. His attack on the playwright Wu Han in 1965, commissioned by Jiang, became the Cultural Revolution's first blade. Wu died in prison 4 years later. Yao didn't kill with hands. He killed with ink. Wang was different. He came from the factories, a worker who knew how to move crowds like machinery. In Shanghai, militias under his influence beat rivals, seized rail yards, shut down entire districts. He was the revolution's youngest rising star. And the most dangerous kind, the one who thought violence was proof of purity. MacFarquhar and Schoenhals write that Mao fed their radicalism and feared it at the same time. But fear didn't restrain him. He encouraged their purges, their accusations, their storms of terror, as long as the storm did not reach him. By late 1967, a new truth defined China. Mao created the stage, but the Gang of Four wrote the script, a script of violence, humiliation, and ruin. The Cultural Revolution was spinning out of control, and Mao's monsters were just getting started. 1968. China was no longer a country. It was a crime scene in slow motion. Cities burned with suspicion. Villages whispered betrayal. Schools turned into execution grounds. And in the center of the storm, Mao's radicals tightened their grip. MacFarquhar and Schoenhals call this phase the institutionalization of terror. Not chaos, not anarchy. Terror with an office, a letterhead, and Mao's signature. Jiang Qing, she struck first at the world she hated most. The artists, the performers, the writers. She called them poisonous weeds, a phrase that became a death sentence. Actors like Zheng Junli, once celebrated, now dragged through denunciation rallies until his body collapsed. Stage directors who had never held a weapon were forced to kneel in gravel while crowds screamed for blood. Jiang didn't need to give orders. Her speeches were enough. Every denunciation she barked into a microphone was echoed by thousands of fists across China. Zhang Chunqiao understood something the mobs didn't. A purge is more powerful when it wears a uniform. He reorganized Shanghai's government into revolutionary committees, structures that replaced law with ideology and replaced officials with loyal radicals. One committee member later told historians, "It felt normal to arrest people. It felt expected." Zhang made terror procedural, predictable, efficient. A factory manager guilty of nothing but caution could disappear in the morning and be gone forever by nightfall. Yao Wenyuan, not with bullets, with paragraphs. Yao's articles in People's Daily read like indictments. He didn't name individuals. He named categories. Monsters and demons, capitalist roters, enemies of Mao Zedong thought. Vague enough to apply to anyone, sharp enough to damn everyone. Wu Han had already paid the price. Others followed. When Yao wrote, people vanished. Wang Hongwen. While the older radicals worked through committees and newspapers, Wang commanded the raw engine of terror, the workers. Under his influence, factories formed rebel worker units. They carried pipes, chains, and iron rods. They stormed warehouses, shipyards, train stations. They weren't fighting enemies. They were fighting symbols. At the height of the violence, Shanghai's police force stopped functioning. The law was whatever Wang's men said it was. This era had too many dead to count, but some names refused to fade. Liu Shaoqi, China's head of state, once Mao's closest peer, beaten, denied medicine, left to die alone in a freezing room. His corpse was cremated secretly, his name banned from being spoken. Peng Dehuai, the general who dared criticize Mao, dragged from prison to prison, beaten until he could no longer stand. Teachers, professors, librarians, thousands killed, their only crime a lifetime of learning. MacFarquhar notes, by 1968, the terror had a rhythm, and the radicals kept time. This was the height of the Gang of Four's influence, not because they controlled ministries, but because they controlled fear. Fear ruled the streets. Fear ruled the factories. Fear ruled the classrooms. But dictatorships carry a paradox. The terror that elevates you also isolates you, and the radicals did not see what was coming. Mao was getting older, sicker, more suspicious. The terror they unleashed in his name was beginning to frighten him too. And when a dictator feels threatened, he does what he always does. He prepares to eliminate those closest to him. 1972. China was exhausted. The Cultural Revolution had devoured its enemies, then its friends, then its own children. Factories limped. Universities emptied. Families carried wounds no one was allowed to describe. In the middle of this wreckage, Mao Zedong began to fade, his health failing, his speech slurred, his days shrinking, and the moment Mao weakened, a new war began, not in the streets, not in the newspapers, inside the throne room. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar writes that in these final years, politics became a silent battle over Mao's corpse, before he was even dead. The Gang of Four wanted power. So did those who hated them. Premier Zhou Enlai was the only man left in Beijing who could still oppose the radicals without being destroyed. He was old, but still trusted by enough parts of the state to act as a counterweight. Zhou tried to stop the bleeding, restoring schools, calming provinces, pushing back against Jiang's cultural purges. And Jiang hated him for it. Schoenhals writes that Jiang saw Zhou as the final obstacle between her and unrestricted authority. She wanted him weakened, discredited, erased, but Zhou Enlai was too respected to purge outright. So she waited. Deng Xiaoping had been purged, humiliated, sent to a tractor repair factory in Jiangxi. But Mao, always paranoid about a power vacuum, brought Deng back quietly in 1973. Deng was competent, efficient, everything the radicals feared. Jiang Qing called him a poisonous snake. Zhang Chunqiao called him the capitalist soul of the party. They weren't wrong. Deng wanted stability, not ideology. Reconstruction, not revolution. He threatened everything the Gang of Four had built. Meetings in Zhongnanhai grew tense, cold, suffocating. Zhang Chunqiao sharpened political traps. Yao Wenyuan drafted articles that could be released at any time. Wang Hongwen, now in Mao's good graces, circled like a younger version of Jiang. Ambitious, energetic, dangerous. And Jiang Qing? She moved through the compound like a shadow with a knife. Whispers from staff described her as volatile, determined, watching every gesture. She saw herself as Mao's heir, the only one who truly understood the revolution he wanted. But history is not written by conviction. It is written by alliances, and the Gang of Four had none. MacFarquhar and Schoenhals both describe Mao's final years as a deadly balancing act. He needed the radicals to keep the revolutionary flame alive. He needed Deng and Zhou to keep the state from collapsing, so he played them against each other. He praised Jiang one day and scolded her the next. He elevated Wang Hongwen, then froze him out. He trusted Zhang's discipline but denied him real authority. He used Yao when it suited him and ignored him when it didn't. Mao balanced the Gang of Four the same way he balanced the entire country. Keep everyone fearful. Keep everyone desperate. Keep everyone guessing. The radicals knew Mao was dying. They knew that once he was gone, their enemies would come for them, so they waited, prepared, plotted. Zhang whispered that she was Mao's true successor. Wang dreamed of becoming China's next leader. Zhang and Yao guarded documents like weapons, all of them circling an empty throne. And every day, Mao's breathing grew weaker. Their window of survival was shrinking. 1976, the year China held its breath. Mao Zedong was dying, not dramatically, not suddenly, but inch by inch, a dictator collapsing under the weight of his own long rule. His lungs failing, his heart stuttering, his mind drifting in and out of clarity. MacFarquhar describes Mao in these final months as a man surrounded by enemies he created, unable to trust those he needed most. Every room he entered stiffened. Every whisper outside his door sounded like treason. Even his doctors spoke cautiously, as if a wrong word could end their careers. Because when a dictator dies, every second becomes a battlefield. January 1976. Zhou Enlai died before Mao. The last calm presence in Beijing, gone. The people mourned him openly, spontaneously. Tens of thousands gathered at Tiananmen Square to lay wreaths. And Jiang Qing saw something she hated, love, for someone other than Mao, for someone other than herself. She ordered the wreaths removed, torn apart, truckloads of flowers dumped into the gutter. Historian Michael Schoenhals writes that the radicals treated the mourning as a counter-revolutionary act. The people responded with anger, a quiet, simmering anger, and the Gang of Four smiled, believing public resentment didn't matter as long as Mao lived. They were wrong. Jiang blamed the Tiananmen mourning on Deng Xiaoping, called it a plot, a capitalist conspiracy, an attempt to seize power while Mao faded, and Mao, in his confusion, removed Deng again. For the Gang of Four, it was a victory. Their greatest enemy, exiled, isolated, helpless. But victories under dictatorships carry a curse. They last only as long as the dictator does. By summer, Mao could barely speak. Aides had to lift him in and out of bed. Visitors described him as a shadow in a chair, barely breathing. Jiang Qing hovered by his side. Zhang Chunqiao controlled documents. Yao Wenyuan drafted statements for succession. Wang Hongwen waited like a soldier on standby. They believed they were ready. They believed they would inherit the revolution. But they misread Mao's dying mind. MacFarquhar notes that in his final decisions, Mao did something the radicals feared most. He elevated Hua Guofeng, a quiet, loyal, unthreatening figure. A man no one expected. A man who owed the radicals nothing. Hua was Mao's final insurance policy against the very monsters he had created. September 9th, 1976. At 12:10 a.m., Mao Zedong's heart stopped. No thunder, no final speech. Just a quiet end for a man who created a nation of noise. Inside Zhongnanhai, the silence was heavy. Staff members bowed their heads. Guards stood frozen. And Jiang Qing, Mao's widow, wept loudly, theatrically. Not everyone believed her tears, because now the question was no longer, what does Mao want? It was, who controls China now? For 10 years, the Gang of Four had ruled in Mao's shadow. And now the shadow was gone. Their crimes were exposed, their enemies waiting. Their protection evaporated in a single breath. The dictator was dead, and his enforcers were suddenly alone. Mao was dead. And the moment his heartbeat stopped, the Gang of Four stopped being powerful. They became vulnerable, because everything they had ever done, every purge, every denunciation, every killing, had been protected by one fact. Mao allowed it. Now Mao was gone, and the knives they once held were turning against them. Right after Mao's death, Beijing entered a strange silence, a tense, unnatural calm. Hua Guofeng, Mao's chosen successor, a man underestimated by everyone, moved quietly. And beside him, in the shadows, stood someone even more dangerous. Ye Jianying, the marshal who never forgave the radicals for humiliating the army during the Cultural Revolution. MacFarquhar writes that Ye waited 10 years for the moment to strike back. The moment was here. Zhang Qing expected the masses to rise for her. She expected workers, students, and loyal Red Guards to pour into Beijing chanting her name. None came. After a decade of terror, China was done with chaos. And the Gang of Four felt something they had not felt since 1966. Isolation. Cold. Complete. Inside Zhongnanhai, witnesses recall the atmosphere in the compound as poisonous. Jiang Qing raged, shouting about her historic mandate, her rightful inheritance of Mao's line. Zhang Chunqiao said little, calculating, waiting, as if he still believed logic could save him. Wang Hongwen paced like a trapped animal, a man whose rise had been too fast to prepare him for a fall. Yao Wenyuan wrote frantic notes that no one would read. They sensed the walls tightening, but never imagined how fast they would close. October 6th, 1976, night, a secure room in the Great Hall of the People. Hua Guofeng summoned Zhang and Wang to a routine meeting. They walked in unsuspecting. Within minutes, elite security forces entered the room and arrested them without a struggle. At the same time, other squads moved through Zhongnanhai to seize Jiang Qing and Yao Wenyuan in their residences. No warning, no violence, no dramatic last stand. Just a quiet, surgical operation ending the most feared political faction in modern Chinese history. Ye Jianying later said, China could not take one more day of them. The next morning, Beijing woke to a single, stunning radio broadcast. The Gang of Four has been smashed. The word smashed was deliberate, violent, final, a signal that their era was over. Crowds filled the streets, not in protest, but celebration. Tens of thousands gathered at Tiananmen Square. People lit firecrackers. Some wept with relief. Others shouted, "Down with Jiang Qing's clique." For the first time in 10 years, China felt oxygen returning to the air. Zhang Qing screamed as she was taken away. "Mao made me do it. Everything I did was for Chairman Mao." Her last defense was the truth, and also her final betrayal. Without Mao, the Gang of Four had no ideology, no legitimacy, no shield. They were creatures of his storm, and storms end, their reign of terror. 10 years of blood, humiliation, and fear collapsed in a single night. And the hunters had become the hunted.